Okay, so this is
And then that happened.
take 2 of treatment and recovery. We'll see how much I can remember what I just said. Okay, welcome back to Addiction Alliance programming. We are going to continue the discussion of treatment and recovery. Treatment of, well, addiction, because that's typically what people have in mind when they go to treatment is I'm going to address my addiction. So we will continue talking about treatment recovery, moving towards a working definition of substance use disorder or addiction, as most folks call it, and what treatment looks like. So, well, fixing the problem. That's what most people want, is they want a solution to the problem. We're gonna talk about a definition of addiction, and we're going to talk about how treatment involves concepts like mindfulness-based stress reduction and how trauma is interlinked with that. So we're working through the process here of what essentially are the two main components of treatment. Why are we here? Why is it that I need to address addiction? Why have I become addicted to drugs and alcohol? And I use that language because that's the language that resonates with people, with their understanding of what treatment is I got to quit using drugs. And most people desperately want to know why. Why is it that this has happened to me? And then equally, or maybe even more importantly, what do we do about it? So on the one hand, why am I here? And then what do we do about it? This is a great question and set of answers, but without the what do I do about it, folks tend to get really frustrated. You could approach your treatment as, well, I don't really care why I'm here. Let's just figure out what to do about it. Usually, however, when folks contemplate that, there's something lost in translation, and there's a sense of emptiness because, well, quite frankly, inquiring minds want to know. And this is why I think curiosity is such a wonderful component of early recovery. Folks tend to like to know why they are in distress, even if it's the end of the line and they're just so used to that distress that it's difficult to even, pose such questions. So, however, we are here to get some answers. So, we're here to talk about recovery and treatment. There are a lot of barriers to treatment. We are in a room with a group of people, and a lot of people can't access that. So here we are providing the information on the internet. Theoretically, you could do treatment without ever coming to a building and actually engaging face-to-face with professionals or peers. That is the wonder of technology. So let's get right into it. We talked about the barriers of treatment. We talked about what treatment looks like, the different levels of care of treatment, everything from doing absolutely nothing about it to going full-on inpatient and residential. The program we're running here is somewhere in between. It is a day treatment style program. So it is a pretty high level of care. And we're here to talk about what is being treated. What is recovery? Recovery is the process of healing from something or some things. Recovery is healing. Therefore, if we are in recovery, addiction is an injury of some sort. We will talk about how substance use disorder is or becomes a way of life, psychosocially, and spiritually. In other words, it impacts every domain and facet of your life. But it is injurious. Using drugs and alcohol is injurious. It is self-harm. It causes harm. Psychosocially, and spiritually. It causes physical harm. It causes mental health, psychological harm. It causes social and spiritual harm. That is to say, using drugs and alcohol damages your body. Using drugs and alcohol in great amounts continually damages your mental health. Using drugs and alcohol continually damage your relationships and your view of society and your place in society. And last but certainly not least, using drugs and alcohol continually in large amounts, chronically, damages your spiritual health. It is self-harm. A simple exercise in mental gymnastics, you would flip the script and say, okay, well, if using is self-harm, then recovery from that harm is self-care. That is the transition we make from using and self-harm to recovery. We use self-care as the model to begin the transition from using to recovery, and the continuity of recovery as sustainable and long-term is also rooted in self-care. So we have two concepts that we've been discussing lately in group, which is transition or change, adaptation, and continuity. A lot of folks come to treatment with a history of, I've quit in the past for a month or a year, and I've always gone back. So it hasn't been continual. It hasn't been sustainable. The abstinence from drugs hasn't been continual and sustainable. And there is most certainly a transition from using to abstinence, from the way of life of drug addiction, so-called, to recovery. It is a great transition. Human beings struggle with transition. And human beings struggle with continuity when their lives have been chaotic. So we're going to talk about all of these concepts, and we're going to bring it together to come up with a program of self-care to not only stop using drugs, but to keep it sustainable. In order to sustain recovery, you will have to figure out why it is you used drugs to begin with and why it was so hard, why it has been so hard to stop. These are some of the answers that we will hope to arrive to conclusions and some of the questions that we are going to hope to answer. So, most folks don't really need to understand how dangerous drugs and alcohol, the behaviors of using drugs and alcohol are for their physical health, their mental health, their spiritual health, and their social health. There's plenty of information on the internet, how certain drugs damage certain bodily systems. You know, for example, alcohol kills the body at a cellular level, but alcohol tends to ravage your kidneys and liver. It can create cirrhosis. It can create diabetes too, so-called, the lifestyle diabetes. Opioids, you can overdose and die. You can get abscesses and you can get communicable diseases. Cocaine can damage your heart. It doesn't take much insight to understand how drugs and alcohol affect your mental health, anxiety, depression, OCD, PTSD. All of these mental health concerns are exacerbated by the use of drugs and alcohol. Relationships are destroyed by addiction, by using drugs and alcohol chronically and in large amounts. And then, of course, your spirituality is sapped from you. Spirituality consists in great part, of hope and faith. It is the fuel of our lives. It drives our lives. It helps us practice our humanity. And chronic use of drugs and alcohol deprives you of that fuel. But to look at biopsychosocial spiritual self-harm as being solely a result of wanton drug and alcohol abuse is to miss the picture. We need to figure out why we would practice that self-harm to begin with. There are underlying conditions that lead to disease. A lot of people say, well, that's a choice. Well, if it is, it's not an informed choice, because who would choose to practice self-harm day in and day out? What are we really looking for when we use drugs, or what were we looking for when we began to use drugs? That's a very good question that we hope to answer as we start to promote a continual and sustainable recovery transition from using to sobriety. We mentioned in the last segment that recovery is more than just abstinence. Recovery is an entree or an opening. It's the first step to moving towards a holistic program of wellness. Recovery is about wellness. It's about healing. It's identifying the injuries that you've sustained before using drugs and then during and after using drugs. So that's going to be a hard look, but a gentle look at our childhood or early adulthood, or a lot of the adversity we have experienced during adulthood. So you get to start to talk about what is called trauma, which is experiencing adversity, the effects of trauma. So we're going to link that into recovery. That is called dual diagnostic care. When you start to look at substance use disorder or addiction as being related to, but also a cause and effect of other factors, mental health. In our case, our dual diagnostic care is the role of trauma and substance use disorder, how they are interrelated, how they're intertwined, the intersection between traumatic experiences and the evolution and progression of addiction. Most dual diagnostic care is we're going to look at mental health and we're going to look at addiction. Well, in our case, we're going to look at trauma and addiction because the theory is that trauma causes the mental health difficulty. For example, OCD. You can go to treatment for OCD that also looks at your substance abuse. We're going to look at trauma and substance abuse. Sometimes we're going to look at trauma and how it causes substance abuse. Sometimes we're going to look at substance abuse and how it causes trauma. It's the chicken and the egg paradox. What came first, the traumatic experiences or the drug addiction? Are there people who use a whole lot of drugs and become traumatized and now all of a sudden they're trauma survivors? Yes. Are there people who are trauma survivors because they experienced adversity early and then began using drugs? Yes. Yes, 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 and everything in between. Therefore, we have to define what addiction is, and we have to figure out what to do to treat it. We also have to define what trauma is and look at how that affects us and changes our mind and the way that we operate, and then how to treat that. So the bad news, I suppose, is that, oh man, we got to look at our trauma and our mental health and our physical health and the addiction, right? Well, the good news is that we're going to come up with a blueprint architecture to build a program of recovery based on strategies and principles and behaviors and ways to manage thoughts and feelings that can address the trauma, the mental health, the relationships, the spiritual health, the physical health, and the behaviors of addiction. Our framework of recovery will be able to address all of those components. Good thing, because it would be very difficult indeed if you needed a different set of skills to address all of those individual components. And the framework that we develop is based on acceptance, as we mentioned last segment. And acceptance is a component, a driving force of what is called mindfulness-based stress reduction. We are going to define what mindfulness is, and we are going to use that as the foundation, if you will, of our skill set to address things like cravings, dysfunctional relationships, spiritual malaises like anxiety and depression, mental health issues. We are going to use mindfulness and acceptance as the foundation to build our recovery. Because mindfulness allows us to be aware of what's going on in our environment as well as what's going on between our ears. The greatest barrier to abstinence and holistic recovery is right here. It's right between our ears, or between our temples. It's our mind. So, we will talk about trauma. We will talk about mindfulness. Next, we are going to tackle what is addiction? What is the definition of addiction? What does it look like? Because once we understand that, then we can move forward to what to do about it. I also want to speak a little bit about various attitudes towards addiction and recovery. the prevailing model of recovery since the 1950s has been 12 steps. Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous. Most recovery centers are 12-step based or refer to the 12 steps. Many inpatient or residential treatment facilities will send you to meetings every day. They will give you an option to go to a meeting. The meeting might be on site, or they might use transportation to get you to a meeting. Since the 1950s, doctors, psychiatrists, treatment professionals, and everyone in between, family members, peers, will suggest that 12 steps is the best way to approach recovery. Some people say it's the only way to approach recovery. Many people say it has the best numbers in terms of success. These are all very difficult things to prove or assess for. What we will say in the Addiction Alliance program is, 12 steps is a huge part of many, many, many people's recovery. It has great value in many different ways. To say that it's the only way to embrace recovery by practicing abstinence and sobriety it's quite a claim, and that's difficult to prove. What we try to do in our program is provide a blueprint or a roadmap towards recovery, a holistic recovery that covers a lot of different bases. And 12 steps and 12-step meetings will be a huge part of that for many people, if they choose. There are a variety of things about 12 steps that resonate with people: social inclusion, identification, validation. The steps work for many people. It resonates. But it's not for everyone. And what I've found over the years, not only in my own life, my initial attitudes towards 12 steps were very hostile. I will tell you that I personally have been to 1,000+ meetings in my life. My colleague Connie has and is active in 12 steps. We have a very pro 12 steps attitude. However, we work with a lot of people that are hostile towards 12 steps and just, quite frankly and plainly state, nope, I'm not doing meetings. That's not for me. So for those folks, there has to be a program that they can embrace to help them achieve sobriety, abstinence, and then holistic recovery. Maybe they embrace 12 steps later once they get going, or maybe not. There have to be alternatives because a lot of people just don't want to do 12 steps. So our program will mention 12 steps here and there, but we're not 12 steps based because we don't want to alienate people. Also, 12 steps is largely a spiritual program, and it bills itself as such. And there is more to recovery than spirituality. It's a huge part of spirituality, but there's a physical health component. There is a social component, which 12 steps helps address. There is a mental health component. 12 steps doesn't necessarily help you with your mental health. And then, of course, there's a trauma-informed component, and 12 steps isn't necessarily trauma-informed. Any given meeting, there aren't trauma-informed therapists there to watch the proceedings. So we need to come up with a program that is accessible to a lot of different folks. So if 12 steps is your thing, great. We're going to incorporate that into this program. If it's not, stay tuned, because we're not going to ram 12 steps down anyone's throat. Another topic I want to address is the role of I or me in recovery. You hear a lot of people say recovery is a selfish thing because I gotta take care of mine, right? And it's about me for the first time ever. Well, not really, because addiction is a really selfish, self-centered thing. Westerners, which most of us are, and not all the viewers, but everyone in this group is a Westerner. We are consumed and obsessed with the self. One of the great principles of Western philosophy is self-reliance and self-determination, and the I. Rene Descartes famously posited, "I think therefore, cogito ergo sum." I think therefore I am. That is That is a statement that revolves around the self, trying to identify who I am. Addiction and mental health and trauma are very personal, self-centered dynamics, egocentric. Recovery, therefore, I do recovery for me, not you, right? So it's about me, right? It's my thing. Everyone talks about my recovery. My recovery comes first. In other words, I need to, at any given moment, I need to think, is this impacting my recovery? I need to make decisions to protect my recovery. We've been protecting ourselves our whole lives, and when we look at recovery as being about me and myself and self-preservation, on the one hand, here's another paradox. On the one hand, that makes sense, because if you die from drugs or self-harm, there's no self to protect in this world. So recovery is about saving myself, about myself not using drugs anymore. So therefore, it is self-ish. However, on the other hand, recovery is very much about moving away from the idea of self. 12 Steps, for example, here we go with 12 Steps, talks about, turning your will over to a higher power, because the higher power is bigger than you. And when you use a whole lot of drugs, you become very selfish, and you think, it's all, the world revolves around you. So on the one hand, your recovery, which has to do with yourself, is based on an idea of the world, the universe, your life being more than just you. So on the one hand, it's selfish. On the other hand, it's selfless. You interact with other people in your recovery, so therefore it's not just about, I've never seen anyone do recovery by themselves. One of the pillars of our recovery program is support. So therefore, it's not selfish, because you need other people to help you. So you need to get over yourself in order to embrace that. So on the one hand, it is selfish because it's about you or me. On the other hand, it is about we. We're in a group. I don't do one-on-one psychotherapy for folks, or I try not to. I tell people when they want individual therapy to address their addiction, so-called, I say group is better. And they say, why? I don't want to be around other people. I say, you're going to need to be around other people for the rest of your life. And you need to be around like-minded individuals who have a common cause. That's about we. So when we're in group right now, it's I and we. It's me and us. That is a paradox that people have a hard time wrapping their mind around. So get going, because that's what we need to do. So on the one hand, recovery is selfish. On the other hand, it's very selfless. I view it almost as we are going to approach taking care of ourselves and practicing self-care and doing recovery, and almost simultaneously that allows us to start taking care of others. Most people come to me, and part of their suffering is, I'm using drugs and I can't take care of my blank, my kids, my mom. I can't be part of my family. I can't be part of my congregation. I can't be part of my community because I'm just using drugs over and over and over. So not only am I not taking care of myself, I can't take care of everyone else. When you start to properly take care of yourself, and that involves quitting the drugs and the alcohol, it's almost miraculous. You are instantly available to your friends, your family, your children, your community, and the universe, quite frankly. That's the wonderment of recovery. It's the elixir for all that ails you. Both yourself and your interaction with others. You could take it so far as to say that there is no self at all, despite our desperate attempt to carve out a self and a personality. We really are just one. We are one great, magnificent unit of humanity. And really, you could take it even farther and say that it's not just humanity, that we are one with everything else on the planet, the birds, the trees, the rats, the cats, the whole nine yards. That is a pretty cool outlook. That is certainly not about self. That's really about unity and we, and about being part of something much, much, much bigger than your problems and your addiction and your socioeconomic status and all the rest. So that's what recovery is really about, is it's approaching a conception of yourself as being part of the bigger picture, and we call that integration. So on a microcosmic level, we need to integrate as a self. We need to come together as yourself. Yourself, you have been fragmented by trauma and mental health concerns and diagnoses and poverty and abuse and drug use. You've been fragmented, broken. And integration, what Brene Brown calls a whole, an intact human being, is coming together and being fixed at those broken places. Like if you break a piece of crockery and you super glue it together. We are going to become whole. That's the microcosm. The macrocosm, the bigger picture, which we have to see, is how once we become integrated, how we integrate that integrated self into the bigger picture. And if you don't do that, you aren't practicing proper recovery. That's about unity. So it's about I and we, it's about me and us, and everything in between. We integrate as people, and then we are integrated into our family, our community, our recovery community, and then into the world and into the universe. So treatment and recovery, this is about a lot more than just addiction, folks, okay? So welcome to Addiction Alliance Recovery, because this hopefully is something bigger and better than other options that are focused. I have a very myopic, narrow-minded perspective of what treatment and recovery should be and are. We're looking at the bigger picture here, and that means it's a little harder work because you got to wrap your mind around concepts that maybe you weren't, anticipating, but that's okay. The work will pay off, and we're going to talk about that too. That'll be a segment called The Gifts of Recovery, and I ain't talking about what Santa Claus leaves under the Christmas tree. I'm talking about things that we've been yearning for desperately our whole lives. Inclusion, connection, validation, hope, faith, positivity, peak experiences, reaching potential, meeting needs, creating a life worth living. A valued group member earlier said, and then other valued group members commented on it, we're going to learn how to live again, or maybe we're going to learn how to live for the first time, regardless of how old we are or where we're from. That is a life worth living. This is why we're alive, and this is why we need to do recovery. So thanks again for tuning in. I hope it sparked some interest and curiosity. More to come moving forward. Take care of yourselves, stay safe, and go forth and prosper. All right. There we go. There's a good segment, I think.